Welcome to The Counteroffer with Jenny Kim and Meredith Alderson.
We're two top producing agents in Austin who are going to be talking about lifestyle, business, and what really happens behind the deals.
Meredith, Alderson, and Jenny Kim.
Welcome back to The Counteroffer.
Today's guest has a story that is definitely not your typical path into real estate.
Mellisa Reeves grew up on a farm in northern Canada as the oldest of 10 kids, moved to the U.S. at 23, and started her career in lending before realizing pretty quickly that she wanted to be on the real estate side of the business.
Today, Mellisa helps real estate professionals, investors, entrepreneurs, and families build financial systems that are actually sustainable. And she's especially passionate about helping people get off that revenue roller coaster.
Which is exactly what we're going to get into today. Because if you've been in real estate for any amount of time, you probably know that feeling. 1 month is incredible, the next month is quiet, and suddenly you're asking yourself where the next closing is coming from.
Mellisa, welcome to The Counteroffer.
Thank you both so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Mellisa, you and I, this is our very first time meeting.
Yeah.
I've heard little snippets about you from Meredith, but I'd love to hear your story. I know you recently joined EXP.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get started in the business? And
Yeah. So like you mentioned in the intro, I actually got started on the lending side of the business. I was a loan originator for really only a handful of months. And I essentially was building my business by connecting with realtors and trying to get them to send me their business. And I very quickly realized I want to do what you do.
That's where I want to be.
I was behind the desk just crunching numbers all the time. I love to crunch numbers, but I'm also very, very relational. So I really wanted to be spending more time connecting with people. And so I was in the process of moving from the Bay Area to Portland, Oregon, and I knew it was just a moment to kind of make that transition. So I ended up actually, while I was getting my real estate license in Oregon, I got hired as a executive assistant to a man who owned a real estate brokerage and a construction and development company. And I ended up running his whole business for about 1.5 years. And it felt like I got 10 years of experience in that time because he just had his hands in everything, which is kind of has been the theme of my life as well. I learned a ton. I got to do a ton of deals. I got to be really involved on the construction and development side. And then there were some things in his business that I didn't feel aligned with anymore. Plus, I was kind of ready to spread my wings. So I left his company and started on my own. And because I had so much experience and a lot of people that already trusted me, I was able to grow quickly from there. So that was how it started.
I mean, you got the numbers experience on the lending side, construction and development, and then now as a realtor,
This
you're a
woman is
triple threat.
amazing. I'm so excited for you to get to know her better. She is. It's also this very rare combination of she is so good with numbers and income and just a wealth of knowledge. And speaking of wealth, she's very knowledgeable and loves to educate, but just so good with people. And I feel like that combination is so rare.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you. I appreciate that feedback.
I'm glad to have you in our circle.
Yeah, it's been great.
So, ladies, I'd love to start kind of baseline of how long we've been in the industry, because I think that gives a good idea of how long have we been dealing with cash flow issues as realtors. So I got licensed a couple years before COVID. So I kind of entered the business, during the big boom. So I definitely went through this.
You had a lot of cash flow.
Yeah, this feast mentality of wow, this is amazing, and this is going to last forever.
I found the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Exactly. But Meredith, you've been in it since way before.
So I've been in it for 12 years, and I feel like I've seen ups and downs, right?
Mm-hmm.
I came in a very balanced market, healthy and balanced, and then of course COVID, that was crazy. And now more of a down market, right? So I have seen a little bit of everything. Mm-hmm. What about you?
So it was 2007 when I got licensed, and that first 1.5 years, I was, working for another broker. So I wasn't experiencing as much maybe of the pain points of lead generation. But then when I left that company and went out on my own, that was basically during the recession, 2008. It was a hard time at the same time. And I know that this is certainly a combination of hard work and absolutely just luck. My business kind of thrived from the beginning just because there was a lot of trust and a lot of capacity to do different kinds of things. So I was definitely a hustler then more than than more than ever in my life. And I just said yes to a lot of different kinds of things, you know?
That's interesting. I feel like that's how I also built my business. And we've talked about this before, is like, you just hustle and you never say no.
Yeah.
Right. And then suddenly you've got a really great business and you've got to continue to hustle, but you don't have to do it at the same pace to keep it going.
And you can be more discerning with your yeses and your nos as you go. In the beginning, it often does feel like you are just kind of like, okay, sure, I'll figure that out.
Oh yeah. And we've talked about this topic, when to say no. When do you get to say no?
Yeah. When do you get to say no? Yeah. So for me, I think that in those first couple of years, I was still kind of getting my chops as a business owner and entrepreneur. And then I ended up partnering pretty young. So we'll talk more about that later in the episode, but it for me really stabilized cash flow. And I think there's a lot of things about that can be helpful for people depending where they're at on their journey. And really though, it wasn't until later in my career that I really started understanding more of the like financial foundations of building a business, which if I could go back, I would just so badly wish that I could have known those things from the beginning.
I agree.
That is such a common problem, I think, especially for newer agents coming in, is that they're not thinking of it as like, oh, I'm starting a business.
Yes.
Right. They're just like, I'm going to get licensed and I'm going to be a realtor. But I feel like for me, it was only a couple years ago that it started clicking. Like, oh, I actually have a business with cash flow, like P&Ls and, expenses every month that are reoccurring, sometimes not, and really having to dial in. But as a newer agent, I was not even thinking about that. I was just thinking of like commission check in and spending it on my expenses, right?
And unfortunately, that's partly because there is so little education. And I think real estate is a very unique career because it is one of the potentially highest paying careers for the education level, right? So most people in real estate don't have any kind of business or finance background. They're not necessarily coming into it with any kind of skills to support the actual functioning of a healthy business. They are just kind of given this opportunity to create potentially a high amount of revenue based on like sales and skills that they learn as they go.
Yeah, and you don't have anybody teaching you. Nope. This should actually be part of the real estate education curriculum. Yeah. There's no one to teach you about these things. You just sort of figure it out, which I think for all of us, I think we all answered to say that it took us years to start to think of it like a business from the financial aspect. Yeah. We may have been treating it like a business from like sales and marketing,
right?
But the finance, like if you've never had your own business, you have no idea how to do any of that.
Think about it. If you go start a tech company, you know something about doing that. Maybe you have an MBA, maybe you have fundraising experience or finance experience, or at least you have business partners that are skilled in ways that you aren't. And people get into real estate just like taking classes at night while their kids are sleeping.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that surprised me getting into the business was I didn't think about the upfront costs of like, okay, when you're like opening a restaurant or a coffee shop, whatever, you need like seed money, right? To just like get you going. That is something that didn't really cross my mind until expenses started popping up. Like, your signs, your branding, all your fees, like, all of that. And even insurance, like we had to get insurance and my husband and I were both now in real estate. Like there was no company giving us health insurance, right? All those things. And even like investments for your future, like when you're at a company, that stuff is built in, but having to think of all that, it took years to start to chip away at it, but you just never think of it when you're entering the business. And I think it's really important, or you will have a leg up if you are thinking about it before you even start.
And now, can you imagine not thinking about it? Like I think about it every day. I'm constantly thinking about the expenses of my business, income coming in. So maybe we talk about the income coming in. So you're a new agent. You get your first big commission check. What do you do? Because I think all of us, and probably most new agents out there, you spend it, right? Like
you pay yourself. Here you go.
But you're not even thinking of it like that. Right. You're not thinking about paying yourself, which we should also talk about.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the foundation of what I believe and what I teach is in that piece alone. I think when you're a new agent, it does depend perhaps on what you're coming from in terms of career and potentially other financial support in your life. But in most cases, that first commission check is not necessarily, I'm going to go buy a new car or something really nice for myself. It's more like I'm going to catch up on the fact that I probably haven't been making money for the last little while I've
Yeah.
been getting this up
Right.
and going. And so it's kind of, you're always sort of like, you know, in lending, mortgage payments are in arrears. I feel like commissions are in arrears.
Yeah.
You're always paying for the things that like the money you've already spent. And that can be a really hard cycle to get out of. And it's easy to get on that treadmill from the very beginning.
Yeah. So girls, when did you first realize how inconsistent income could be in real estate? And how did you address that?
I think one of the biggest issues for me starting as a new agent, probably a mistake from day one, and I've since overhauled my entire system with finances, but I didn't even think about having a separate business account. Like I just had my commissions going into my regular checking account along, you know, the same account that, you know, our groceries come out of, you know, that we're paying our everyday bills from. And so that number was fluctuating every month. So it was so hard to plan around our finances because yes, you know, I might have a really great 3 months and then it might be completely dead for a month, right? So I think or more.
Yeah.
Yes. I think for me, the commingling of funds was a huge mistake. And if I could go back, I would have really separated everything out and had a clean financial picture on my business and then my expenses. But having everything in one account just did nothing for me as far as clarity goes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the clarity is huge. And everyone's financial picture is already complicated enough, right? We already have so many things moving in and out of our lives. And I think sometimes people think, oh, it will be more complicated if I, you know, go through the effort of setting up a business entity and different bank accounts. And, oh, that just feels like too much. I need the money right now. I'll just have it come into my accounts. And it might sort of feel in the short term like that's the easier solution, but it really is, like you're saying, it just adds to the confusion and really makes it harder later to transition to something that's more functional. My answer to that question is actually kind of interesting because I definitely early on, I mean, I would say that my real estate income was always relatively stable, but looking back now, I can see that that is partly because I was married and had a dual income. So there probably were times where, you know, a month that $5,000 came in versus a month that $15,000 came in didn't feel all that crazy. I can say that a few years ago when I went through a divorce and I was a single woman and a single, you know, provider for my family, and this is kind of like shocking and maybe even, you know, kind of vulnerable to admit, but that's when I first felt it the most. I was like, oh, when it's bad, it's bad.
Yeah.
Like when there's not money, there's not money. Yeah. And it, you know, kind of felt like crazy to be so many years into real estate, almost 20 years into real estate and having that experience. But I think that that's something that I've really learned with the people that I work with. And this isn't just true in real estate, but it's especially true in real estate. Like that volatility can follow you throughout your life. There's something called Parkinson's law, which is essentially that when we think about it in terms of finance, it's, you know, we will use up the available resources, right? So if you were making $60,000 a year when you were younger and you're making $300,000 a year now, you're probably spending almost all of the $300,000 or potentially even more, which a lot of people do now. So, you know, if there's a low month, it doesn't have to be that low for it to affect your cash flow, you know, and that's, people just tend to do that. They kind of, their expenses rise to meet their level of income. And so at any point, if someone is not making really intentional choices with their money and with their reserves, if you have one low month, you can really, really feel the pain.
Yeah. And speaking of reserves, like taxes.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
That was not something that crossed my mind the first few commission checks. And then like we started talking, we were like, oh my God, like we are going to owe a lot of money. Like we better start planning for that. So what would you say, like as a new agent, like just got licensed, you know, they're going to have a closing coming up in 2 weeks. Yeah. What would you say is like simplest way to set up their finances just off the bat to just give them a good foundation?
Yes, totally. So like you said, Jenny, I do recommend like from the very beginning, setting up a simple, you know, I'm not going to give legal advice on what you should set up, but you know, an LLC is what often people do. And then bank accounts in that name. And I actually really recommend a multi-account system, which is how you can really kind of get ahead of all of this. Because, you know, you mentioned this earlier, when you're business income is coming into a personal account, for example, that's where your groceries and your mortgage and, kids' soccer stuff and all of that is coming from. And, if you have a partner, there's additional layers of complexity there. But it's true within a business as well. If the money just comes into a single account and you're not extremely diligent with what happens with that money, it's like, okay, yes, where does the money for taxes go? If you just sort of have it earmarked in your head, it's going to get spent if it's just in that account, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to set money aside for your expenses, but it's all just in one account, it's not going to work. It's not going to happen. The money will get spent. And so I recommend setting up a series of accounts so that you can, every time a commission check comes in, yes, in the beginning, maybe you are kind of paying yourself back for time that has been lost or expenses that you've incurred in getting your license or not working for, a period of time while you're doing that. But really getting into the habit from the very beginning of money comes in, and how I actually set it up is I have a separate account for where money comes in. So that nothing ever goes out of that account. It can't accidentally get spent. It sits there and then it gets allocated to everywhere else. So I have accounts for taxes. I have accounts for profit, which is the underpinning of the business itself. An account for paying myself, an account for expenses, and then I have an additional account for what I call materials, which is essentially the percentage of everything. It's different than business expenses, and this is something that takes it's not super complicated, but a business expense is something that you're going to pay no matter what. Your software subscriptions, your assistant, whether you had a slow month or a busy month, you're going to pay for X, Y, and Z. A material is something that is specific to the revenue that is generated. So if you have a listing and you have photography and you have, all the things associated with that, those would be materials, because if you didn't have that listing, you wouldn't have had those expenses. Exactly. Yeah. So what I recommend that people do, and this can take a little bit of time, so if you're a new agent, you're not going to know exactly what this is, but pay close attention to what you're actually spending, what your business expenses are, and what your revenue generating expenses are. So over time, you'll be able to see about 10% of everything that comes in actually needs to be set aside for materials, for the listing expenses and, the ads and the flyers and all of those things that I need to do. And so that money comes off the top and it sits in its own account. So at the end of the day, what you're left with to pay yourself is actually realistic, right? And you also do need to pay yourself. So this system allows you to do that.
I don't track it at that level of detail. I definitely have the structure set up that you're talking about, not the multiple accounts, but like everything's completely separate, like Jenny.
Yeah.
But I've never really thought about like the material expenses versus just business. I just lump them all together.
Same.
Yeah. And I'm not saying it's wrong to do that.
No,
it's extremely helpful.
That.
It's
it would be
extremely
great to have
helpful.
Clarity.
Because especially if I'm, I'm now in the process of working with my CPA of like, okay, let's get our tax stuff ready. And, just asking like, what are your expenses? Your fixed expenses and your non-fixed, right? And I'm like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Like I just have one company credit card and that's what I use to pay my photographer and all my systems and but it's every month it kind of fluctuates based on how many listings I have.
Yeah.
Totally.
One thing that I do from your suggestion is I do have a separate account for taxes.
Yes. Yeah. At a minimum, that's a requirement.
Especially
at a minimum.
because I could do like a high yield savings account, right? Because that money, it becomes a decent amount by the end of the year.
Absolutely.
So that's been really nice. And that's kind of like a set it and forget it. Like I know X% of every commission I'm going to put there. What I don't want to happen is what happened my first year where I got hit with this giant tax bill and I didn't have nearly enough money.
Yeah.
I have like PTSD
I think that's
from that.
so common. And I think that's, you learn the hard way in this business, right? On the financial side. The other thing I think is interesting about this discussion is oftentimes we'll be asked to discount our fees. And you think about, I think most people don't realize all of these things that we're having to spend money on, right? Like one, we have to pay taxes from that commission check, but all of the material costs and just business expenses, I mean, it goes pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It really does. And it's, again, like I said before, it's one of the only industries that someone could theoretically go from like not having invested a lot of money into education and suddenly making six figures and not accustomed to the tax bill associated with that.
Right.
Yeah.
So back to your different accounts. I want to talk about the profit account because that sounds really interesting to me. So that is money that's left over after you've paid all the other accounts, right? Your taxes, your
It's
salary.
not that.
Oh,
It's the opposite of that. So this is based on the profit first system, which is it's intentionally flipping what you just said on its head. So traditional accounting is exactly that. You have your revenue, you have your expenses, and profit is what is left at the end of the day, which there is almost never profit left at the end of the day in any form of business. Because again, Parkinson's law, we will spend, we'll find some way to expense all the things. And we've all done it a million times. We're like, oh, I'm sure I could write off this thing. I'm sure I could do this. I'm sure I could do that. So there's not profit left at the end of the day. So the way this system works is actually and it's different for everybody. Some people, it might be a fairly small amount and others may choose to prioritize more, but you actually take profit off the top. And so what the equation looks like, revenue minus profit is what's left for expenses. And expenses includes paying yourself, right? Everything that the business needs to do to function, including paying the owner, is what's left.
So how do you figure out that profit
Yeah,
amount?
I was going to ask that too.
I mean, it really is a personal choice, and where people are at in their business could change, based on where they're currently at. Usually when I'm helping people figure this out, they might have a goal of a 10% profit account where they're taking 10% off the top of everything and putting that aside. But maybe where they're at in terms of their cash flow, they can do 2% at the time. And so then we'll kind of work out a roadmap that helps them over maybe an 18-month period get to that 10% goal. I would say that somewhere between 5 to 10% is really the goal. And how that profit gets used is it can be different. Some people will choose to reinvest that in the business in ways that are meaningful, not just like, oh, we're gonna, pay for this excursion that, seems like a fun idea, but something that's meaningfully going to actually improve the operations or the profitability of the company. And then part of it is also really intended to benefit yourself as the owner. So there's the component of paying yourself. Imagine if you worked for, again, like a tech startup or something like that, right? You would be taking a salary, and then the company, when it was profitable, you would also get a distribution, a portion of those profits. So that's really how we're thinking of that. Now, I don't want to overcomplicate this for a newer agent. It really isn't very complicated. You might be setting aside 1%, and then over time you take some of that and you enjoy it yourself, right? You take it and you benefit from it as the owner of a business, because there's a difference between working in your business and paying yourself to do that,
right,
and actually benefiting from the risks that it takes to run a business. Those are two different things, right? You're an employee in a sense of your business, and you're also the person that has taken the steps and the risks that it takes to make that business happen. So that's where the profit piece comes in.
And paying yourself, that is a concept that I was not aware of until probably 6 years into my real estate career. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and the importance of that.
Absolutely. So again, how much people pay themselves is really, there's a few different ways to go about it. I mean, we all know kind of approximately what we need to live on, right? And so that is part of that baseline. I love to help people figure out what their life really costs, because it's easy to be like, oh, I have a mortgage and I have childcare and I have, groceries and whatever, but they're not thinking about the million other things that add up to an annual cost to live. And so reverse engineering from there is a really powerful thing to do. Okay, I thought my monthly expenses were $12,000. Actually, when I think about it on an annualized basis, it's maybe more like 20, And so then if that's the case and you need to pay yourself $240,000 a year to live at the level you'd like to live, then that's kind of your starting point. Now, you may be nowhere near that, and maybe that number sounds crazy to some people and probably small to others, but it's really thinking very proactively about that. And sometimes discovering that number means one of two things, and sometimes a combination of both. It's like, I might need to make more money, and I might also need to actually think about how I'm living. Do I really need $240,000 a year to live? How many of these things are things that maybe right now are not essential or in fact making my life more difficult?
That's so valuable, because I think of my personal finances in like one silo and my business in another, but they are so connected obviously. And I think how valuable to be able to back into these numbers through that discussion versus just like arbitrarily coming up with, I think I should pay myself X.
Yeah. And we all have to start somewhere, right? Like when you're getting started in real estate, maybe that first year you make $40,000, $50,000, that might not really move the needle that much on your annualized living expenses, but you can start to be really intentional with paying yourself a designated amount, even if it's not like covering the full amount. And then I would say too, for people that are maybe at a place where they're making a lot of money, and maybe there's excess money, this really helps you to be intentional about that excess so that it's not just either A, getting spent without any, consciousness around it, or B, just kind of like languishing in the nothingness of like, there's no purpose, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure some people are investing money or, choosing to do things that have a return, but where's the purpose? Like, how are we being purposeful with our money?
And I think also, aside from when you pay yourself a salary, you have, you can plan, right? Like, this is how much I'm going to get. But the tax benefits, I think, is something people overlook too, because if you're just taking everything you're making, like, you're going to get taxed on that full amount. But when you're paying yourself a salary and then maybe you're taking dividends or, profit sharing or whatever, it really can affect your tax structure in a great way.
Yeah.
Do you guys ever feel like this is so overwhelming and there's no way that agents know how this stuff works?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I've learned this by trial and error on
Same.
my own, but we're all doing it. We're all dealing with it. But why don't we talk about it?
Yeah.
Because it's like,
Well, we are.
we are.
We're here.
But
but we don't.
we
Yeah.
all learned the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
And I am constantly learning about this aspect of my business. I mean, in every aspect, but this specifically, the accounting piece and the tax piece. And it's
Arguably
like,
the
there's
most
so
important
much
part of your
to
business.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is so much to know. I mean, part of there being so much to know is what makes it overwhelming to people. So they just put the money in their personal
Ignore
account
it.
and hope for the best, right? And I mean, I've had the privilege of being able to help some newer agents set up these systems from the beginning, and they would never go back. Like, it is actually so simple, especially when you are starting, because it's not a lot of money you're dealing with yet, and it's not super complicated, and like, you probably won't have a 6-figure tax bill. Like, it's not that hard in the beginning. It's actually the easiest time to do it, So it's really powerful to do it that way.
Yeah, so valuable to have set that up from the very beginning, right?
I want to hear about your exact systems. Like, are you using QuickBooks? Are you just doing everything on a credit card and pulling statements? Like, what do you recommend?
I do use QuickBooks for my accounting, and I have a business credit card. And how I actually use an online bank called Relay that makes this multiple account setup super simple, and it is really, really effective because it has a lot of tools built in. So for example, instead of having to let's say a $25,000 commission check comes in, it comes into that income account. And then I, have a little allocator calculator that tells me, okay, based on my situation, this is how much needs to go to all these other places. And instead of having to make those transfers individually,
It's automated?
It can be automated, yes. And also you can do a manual transfer to multiple accounts all at once. So it's
that's cool.
It's so fast and easy.
Yeah.
And the way the accounting side of it works on QuickBooks, it's so simple. It's just tracking all of those different accounts, and it knows what's what. And there's no change to the accounting procedures. If I make an expense on a credit card, I use on business and personal side like a credit as cash approach, so that if a credit card purchase is made, there's money set aside to pay that exact amount. So that at the end of the month, if there's a $6,400 credit card bill, there's an account with $6,400 ready and waiting to pay that.
So is that automated? Like, your credit card is hooked in so that it knows, like, okay, she spent $3,200 this month. We're going to pay that from this specific account, and there's enough money in there.
It knows.
That.
I do have to make sure that
The funds are in there.
The funds are in there,
Yeah.
but yes, it's automated.
Gosh, that really puts you in tune with what you're spending money on.
It changes it.
I feel
for sure.
like I could definitely use your services.
Yes.
I think that as your business grows and you start making more income, to your point, like, you will spend it. And then you get to a point where you're like, I'm not even sure what I'm spending money on. My expenses are very high.
Yeah, and what's effective and what's not.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, I think that also is translated in your life too. Like, when you start making more money, you just start spending more, and you lose sight of it. Like, it's almost like out of sight, out of mind. Like, I know I'm going to have this commission coming in, so I know I'm set.
Yeah.
But,
And the point isn't to restrict yourself, but it is to be intentional.
It's discipline.
Yeah. And back to what you were saying about paying yourself, you mentioned the salary and then distributions or dividends above that. I think that that's not necessarily the best first step for a new agent, simply because there is some complexity with setting up. Usually, and again, this is not tax advice, but you can have an LLC and then choose to elect to be taxed as an S corp to have that set up. And so usually that makes sense once people are making more than $60,000 a year, because you have to pay yourself a reasonable salary by the IRS standards to do that. But once you're at that level, it really does make sense. And so that's how I'm set up. I pay myself a salary every month. And then, so let's say that salary is $60,000 a year, so $5,000 a month. But really what I need to take home on a monthly basis is more like $15,000 to live. So the salary is not enough. So I'm going to have to take more as a dividend to cover that difference. And so in a healthy business, we're getting to the point where the money that's needed to pay myself and pay my taxes and pay my assistant or my, whatever my expenses are, and, have the money on the top to pay for listing expenses and all of the things, the right amount of money, or close to the right amount of money, has to go into each of those accounts so that money is there to pay those things, right? And this is where the feast or famine piece really comes in, because if you get a big paycheck, which is a very nice benefit of real estate, you can get some pretty great paychecks. And if your mentality with that paycheck is okay, well, I've got to pay off all this debt, and you want to do something nice for yourself, and the kids will go on this vacation. You just kind of spend it all, which happens very, very easily, as opposed to thinking of, I kind of think of it like a drip system, right? Like if $50,000 came in and I don't need all of that to live on this month, I'm actually going to be really mindful about how many months can that be dripped out over to cover what I know needs to go into each of those accounts.
Because you don't know when the next payday is.
I don't know when the next payday is. And sure, the longer you are in real estate, hopefully the more stability there is. There's, more frequency of transactions and closings. But even so, you might still have a month where it just, the numbers are low. There were no closings, or there was one, but it didn't come till the end of the month, or, things that are tricky. So you really want to be thinking about how can this money actually stretch over a period of time. And then as the volume grows, the stretching grows too. We can actually have more money going into reserves and into the profit account. We can be paying ourselves a more generous salary. All of those things can grow with time.
So those amounts, you're basing it off percentage, or are you just kind of basing it off of your reserves?
It's a percentage that I figure out based on what those needs are, right? So I know that I need a certain percentage to set aside for taxes based on my historic tax liability, right? I know that this approximate amount is going to cover what I need to pay. I know that I'm going to set aside a certain amount for profit no matter what. I know that my expenses are about this much per month, and I know that I need to pay myself about this much per month. So I can kind of reverse engineer what those percentages are and be 60% goes into owner's pay, 30% goes into operating expenses. Those are not the right numbers, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah. And then, it does sometimes have to change a little bit, but it works really well.
So we've talked a little bit about business expenses, and one of the expenses that I think is worth talking about is how much you pay your broker.
Yeah,
right?
It can be a big line item.
And I don't think a lot of agents think about that coming into the business, because there are so many different models, and it can be confusing, and you haven't even had a paycheck when you make that decision, right? For at least the first time. So let's break that down.
Yeah, I think you're right that most people don't think about it, especially because it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind. You never see the money, so you're not thinking of it as an expense. You know that you're paying a split, but you don't see the money, so you're not writing a check or setting it aside, and so it just kind of feels a little bit not relevant.
Yeah. And I think people not really understanding what they're spending money on, which we talked about, is this is one of those pieces. I agree with you. It comes right off the top. But when you actually start to look at the numbers, it can be shocking the more you start to make, right? And so I think it's probably the number one reason the three of us made a brokerage change a little bit later in our careers, actually breaking down that expense.
I think for me was when I was so close to paying my broker almost six figures. That was insanity to me. And I think a lot of the financial stuff comes down to predictability, right? And being able to kind of predict okay, this is how much you're going to make. This is my take home. This is how much I'll pay my broker. But so many brokerages have unlimited, fees that you could pay to your broker. Obviously the more you make, the more you're going to pay them. But same as Meredith, like one of the big reasons I came to EXP was because of that predictability. I knew exactly what I was going to pay my broker, and it was going to be no more than that.
Right.
And that piece was huge.
Yeah. I think you have to think about like, what are you paying for? And you really have to equate that to some amount of value. Mm-hmm. And for some people, they see the value in the brand, the support, the logo, whatever it is. So I think it is a very individual choice, but
which could be so worth it, especially if you're a newer agent or like you need some of that
for sure.
Structure and assistance.
I think it's a seasonal choice for many people.
I agree. Depends on where you are in your career, and it is very, very personal.
Yeah, I feel like I've done all of the versions.
Me too.
Worked for someone like as an employee. I worked for a very low split office that didn't offer much in terms of support or amenities, quote unquote. And then I worked for a company that took a higher split, and I actually really benefited from that season because I really did actually get to rub shoulders with some like very high caliber agents and learned a lot of things that I didn't know yet. And that is actually where I met my business partner, and we ended up starting our own brokerage. And so then we had that whole model, and then and that was for many, many years of my career. And then since being here in Texas, I was at another brokerage that had an unlimited split, like you're saying, where it's like, so you're just going to always take
keep taking
a lot of my money. And I mean, that came about for relational reasons. So it was a good place for me to be for a while. And then I realized, I'm just not willing to leave this money on the table.
Yeah.
You guys, one of the things I still do since making the switch to EXP is I actually track how much I would have paid my last brokerage.
Wow.
It is a staggering amount of money. Yeah. And again, I think we all just have a responsibility to keep track of that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. While you're at a place, know what you're paying for. Yeah. Are you getting the value? And I think none of us have any regrets about the places we've been. We have no regrets about the place we are now. Yeah. Who's to say what the future holds? But you have to know what you're spending money on.
Yeah. And is it worth it?
Yes.
Yeah. It's everything. This comes back to, are you good at real estate? Are you good at real estate sales? Or are you good at running a healthy, functioning business? And those are the things. I always tell my clients there are 3 levers in business. We have, revenue, how much money you're making, what your expenses are, how much you're spending on a monthly and annual basis, and then operations. Like what are your operations effective? And so expenses is so easily overlooked, and it is often the place where we can gain the most because we are often paying for things that are not giving us value, whether that's fees that you're paying to a brokerage or consulting services that are not really giving a return on that investment, or just like a software stack that is completely not, it's useless, or maybe it was useful at some point, but it's redundant now, and you just don't want to like go through. I mean, it's work to do that stuff.
Sometimes you don't have time to cancel.
Sometimes you don't have time to cancel things or to figure out what might be
a better alternative.
Exactly.
And you just get stuck in it. I'm
it's
in that
easy.
boat.
Yeah. It's easy to do.
Well, you're hired.
Yeah.
We start tomorrow.
You offer like consultant services for realtors.
Yeah.
Like this is like a side business for you. So what does that entail?
It's a big part of my business.
Yeah.
It really is I would call it a really collaborative process, and different clients need different things, but it's really diving deep into what the business finances look like, and to some extent the personal. Different clients have different levels of how much they want me to be involved in the personal, but I at least need to know, like, what does your life look like? What do you need to support, and how are the choices that you're making? Because wherever we go, there we are, right? So if you're making choices in your business that are not effective, you might be doing the same thing with your personal finances in different ways. And sometimes there's conversations that need to happen with business partners or spouses or those kinds of things. But it's really kind of getting down to the nitty gritty of what would it take for this business to really thrive and be profitable and sustainable, and then creating the financial systems to make that happen.
This is such a vulnerable topic for people to talk about. I mean, in my head, I'm thinking about the questions you would ask me and how I would feel about answering.
It's super vulnerable. I mean, even for me doing this work, sometimes I'm like, man, you know, and I really do try to lead with vulnerability about my own ups and downs, because I don't think that the answer in life is ever like, okay, well, once you figure this out, you will be in a perfect place.
Right.
That means you'll never struggle. That's really not it. It's actually more about building resilient systems to get you through anything that might happen in life, including financial difficulty.
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, again, going back to how we started, you are so knowledgeable in so many areas.
Thank you.
And what a gift to this industry. And I know you don't just help realtors. I know you and your son have started something fun.
It's really, really cool. So I teach a version of this, like a simplified version of this for teens. And my son and I this summer started actually teaching workshops together.
Wow.
And we've done 2 of them that have been really, really incredible. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah,
What
it's
a
awesome.
gift.
Well, I'm sure there's listeners out there that are going to want to know more about you and your services. Where can they find you?
I have a website. It's just my name, MelisaReeves.com.
Gosh, I feel like I need you today.
I know, overwhelmed today. I'm so glad you were here.
This was so informative. And what we said in the beginning, I think every realtor should be required to take a course on financial literacy because it's potentially a lot of money and you can be in a really tough spot if you don't know how to plan with it.
Absolutely. And I think to summarize like the things that we've talked about, whether you're new or not new and feeling like you're on the roller coaster, like the most important simple things that you could do today and tomorrow that would make a difference. Definitely separate business and personal finances, like Jenny said. Set money aside for taxes. That is like ground zero. And then start to really think about like the numbers that every agent needs to know are like what the difference between their recurring business expenses are and the things that are related to the actual generation of revenue, so that you really know, okay, this is how much, if I have 10 listings a year, this is how much money I need to set aside so that when I have a new listing, I'm not like, where is the money coming from for these photos, right? How am I going to pay for this? How am I going to front all these marketing expenses that are, maybe for a higher end listing that are actually feeling like a stretch? So having that money sitting there is really, really valuable.
Yeah.
Well, we know that financial stress is the worst stress.
It is.
In business or personal. So thank you so much for being here. It was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah,
Mellisa.
thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening today. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you have any questions about anything we covered today, feel free to DM us or contact us on Instagram. I'm at JennyKimATX. And Meredith Alderson.Heyday.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.